Right, and we're live. So this is the second live dualcast that myself and GavsWeatherVids are going to be doing. So the itinerary for today is to discuss the model outputs, including the snow risk for tomorrow and the early part of next week. And then maybe if we get time to look at the winter in perspective and maybe go on to some long-range forecasting. So any preferences about what we start with, Gav? So we'll just start with the GFS. I've seen the 12 sets, but I haven't seen any of the others.
Yeah, I've seen the GFS and the GEM, so we'll start with that.
Okay, let's have a go with that then.
I've not seen the ECMWF yet.
No, I haven't seen the ECM. Anyway, this is. Maybe do you want to start with some nowcasting, because given the snow risk for tomorrow, maybe we should.
Yeah, that's perhaps the best place to start with tomorrow.
Oh, hang on, getting some feedback. Right, sorry about that. So anyway, I noticed that you've looked at the WRF, so I guess we'll start with that.
Yeah, I'll take a look at the WRF. It's still showing what it's been showing, which is the Scotland, Northern England. There could be some snow tomorrow.
Well, I've been interested in this one all week actually. It was something that I think first came to my attention perhaps on Monday, because the idea of a warm front coming into quite cold air is fairly classical. So it's something that I hope I understand fairly well. And the thing to note about it is they can often produce snow when you least expect them to, because people underestimate how cold the air ahead of the warm front can be.
That's right. Unfortunately, with this one, the air isn't greatly cold, so but I think northern parts are going to get perhaps quite a significant fall, actually, more than I was expecting. It does look quite significant for the north.
Indeed, the GFS had basically nothing a few days ago, so I went against the GFS. I mean, basically all the models. I think the only one that was showing anything at all was the ECM. So again, the ECM comes out on top.
Normally does, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, we have the same idea. I noted that a few people actually did see snow today. I mean, I wasn't overly optimistic about the snow amounts today, but as far as I'm aware, it was mostly on higher ground.
Yes, I think so. In the north, on higher ground.
Right. Okay, so this is the WRF's interpretation. So we have a warm front. This is a warm front coming into some fairly cold air. You can see that at first we have a bit of snow over Northern Ireland. I guess I was thinking that maybe one to 2 hours of snowfall possible there, but it seems to have downgraded a bit since last time.
Very wet for most of Ireland. It'll be quite heavy rain if it doesn't snow.
Exactly. And then as it comes across mainland, we have a rather more complicated situation.
Yeah, it's that wintry mix, isn't it?
I mean, you know that actually when you look at sort of the Northern Isles, we've actually got snow falling over the sea, and this kind of indicates to me that if the whole system was maybe 100 or a couple of 100 miles further south, it would be a very significant snow event for everyone, because
it could have been. Certainly for Scotland, that looks quite significant, doesn't it, for Scotland? For a time, anyway.
Well, of course, for higher ground, I think it'll probably stay as snow.
I would think so, yeah.
So that's the WRF's interpretation. Now, I don't know what your opinion is of this, but I think one thing that will determine whether or not the snow does fall to lower levels will be how cold it is tonight. I mean, usually the surface temperature isn't a massive factor, but in one of these very marginal situations, if we get a cold, if the temperature tonight is maybe a few degrees colder than is anticipated, I think that could make a difference.
Yeah, certainly for northern parts that could make a difference. Scotland looks definite for snow. It's northern England, parts of Wales and North Midlands, where he's in that sort of more marginality of the situation. So for them, the temperature is going to be very, very, very important. And of course, elevation will make a big difference as well.
The Met Office seems to think 200 meters above in northern England, but maybe to sea level in Scotland.
Yeah, I think Scotland's going to be mainly snow, at least to start off with, and probably going to a wintry mix on lower levels, but staying as snow on higher levels.
Okay, so I guess shall we look at this in more detail? Shall we do the soundings as before? Because they're always quite good.
Yeah, let's do that.
Well, this is again GFS, so I don't know how to do it with the WRF, but anyway, let's have a look.
The GFS is great because you get so much information, don't you? There's so much information you can get with the GFS.
I'm sure you can do it with the WRF. It's just
finding it all.
Well, I mean, MeteoSeal doesn't do it. I mean, the alternative would be to work out how to do it myself, and I can barely do it with this sort of thing with the GFS. So, okay, let's go with Newcastle then to start off with. So this isn't at 9 o'clock before the precipitation hits, and at this point we have maybe I don't know, that's maybe 50 millibars, a little over 50 millibars of cold, of warm air, of a warm layer there. When the precipitation comes over, you can see that to me that looks like a rain sounding.
Yes, it doesn't look very indicative of snow. Of course, Newcastle is on the coast, so it'll be down the east coast. Even if the air mass is cold down the east coast, on the coast itself, it is more difficult to get snow.
The interesting thing, though, is that the dew points remain very low, and this is one of those nightmare situations. When you get a sounding like this, it basically, I think, essentially what it's saying is it's probably going to be rain, but there's a potential for some evaporation or cooling here. With these two lines so far apart, that says to me that the air is going to be extremely dry ahead of I mean, obviously, the air is usually dry ahead of warmfords anyway, so it shouldn't be so overly surprising. But the fact that it's so dry and the dew point is so low means that there could be an awful lot of evaporation. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the precipitation fails to reach the ground as it first arrives.
Possible.
And if that happens, then this red line could definitely move quite a lot closer to the blue one.
And of course, it's on that forward edge you get the best chance of seeing the snow before it turns back to rain. So if a lot of it is evaporating before it hits the ground, that's not going to be ideal in those areas. But there could be some snow if the dew point does remain quite cold. So yeah, it may drag the temperature down enough to allow some snow to come through.
Okay, let's go with one that's probably more likely. Let's say Edinburgh. Again, 12 o'clock. Is this one slightly better? I mean,
I think that's a little bit better. Yeah, the lines are closer together, so the air temperature is a bit colder, and dew point stays around freezing, so that's a bit better.
I think that's almost exactly 50 millibars. It's difficult to tell, but I think that's almost exactly 50 millibars, and that's basically the benchmark. A 50 millibar layer of warm air is only just enough to completely melt the snow. So for Edinburgh, it's right on the edge.
It's closer than at Newcastle, I think.
But somewhat paradoxically, what could happen is that it could start off as rain in Edinburgh, but if it gets heavy, then this red line will. It sounds odd because it's a warm front, but this does happen. Sometimes the precipitation gets heavier, and this red line actually moves close to the blue line and temporarily turns to snow, and then of course the warm front passes and it turns back to rain again. So we could.
That wintry mix, isn't it? We've had a lot of this all winter, haven't we? But none of the snow events really have been straightforward when they've happened. It's always been very difficult.
See, this is interesting because Glasgow is further to the west than Edinburgh, so you would expect it to be closer to the warm sector. But actually, this sounding looks like snow to me rather than rain, because the lapse rate's much lower. Actually, I think what's going on here is what I just said. The red line is from Edinburgh, you know, the red line used to be somewhere over here, and then it's come somewhat close to the blue one. So
that looks better, doesn't it? Can't really explain why that would happen. You would think it would be colder to the east, wouldn't you? But maybe the rain's heavier in the west, so that keeps the temperature down. I'm not sure, but you know, the precipitation is heavier perhaps to the west. I suppose Glasgow would have more precipitation than Edinburgh in this sort of a pattern.
Yeah,
it may be that the precipitation coming through is heavier.
I think that's basically what's going on here. That if the precipitation's falling for quite a while and it's heavy, then it will turn to snow courtesy of the evaporation or cooling. Still marginal though.
Yeah, close run thing.
And this is Aberdeen. I mean, Aberdeen's a bit close to the coast. Same sort of idea. So I don't know. It's close to being snow, but it probably isn't. Do you want to look at the Euro 4? Have you looked at this one yet?
I took a look at it. I took a look at the 6 o'clock run, but haven't looked at the latest one.
Okay. 12 o'clock.
Well, that doesn't look that good, does it?
Unless you're in Orkney.
Very wet though. It's going to be quite an active rain band.
Oh, I'm very disappointed actually. I hope there will be something good at the last minute.
WRF looks a lot better than that.
Yeah. I might.
I rate the WRF quite highly. I found that performed better than Euro 4 for, if you remember the Boxing Day style event. WRF performed better than the Euro 4, so it's a good model. So I wouldn't entirely rule out it being a more snowy scenario than that for Scotland and Northern England anyway.
I mean, the WRF uses the GFS data, doesn't it? So, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Is it I'm not sure about the model actually. Is it a collaboration of a couple of Met agencies, or is it all on the GFS?
Well, I'm not sure. I've tried to download data directly from the WRF. I haven't worked out how to do it yet. Okay, I mean, I've got these snow maps up anyway. These are the assemble predictions, and they're quite interesting. So, do you want me to go through these ones again?
Yeah, sure. Let's take a look.
Okay. So again, these are just GFS, but they use all the assembles. Okay. Right. So this is 12 o'clock tomorrow. So this sort of corresponds to the snow risk at lower levels rather than higher grounds. I mean, obviously the snow risk isn't going to be only 50% in the Cairngorms. Clearly, it's going to be nearly 100% there. But so this corresponds to it, the sort of snow risk at sea level. It's fairly high, I guess. It's 30, 40, 50%. So that's for tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Try and load it a little bit further forward. Is that? Okay. This is 30 hours ahead, which is, I guess. Okay, can people see that?
I'm certainly seeing that, and it looks very significant for parts of Scotland, northwest, southwest Scotland, northwest of England.
Sort of a low risk, but over a fairly large area.
That's right. It's not a high risk, but it's over a big area. So pays your money, takes your choice. It's not a high risk, but it's over a big area. That.
Right, I think we seem to have exhausted this. I think the general idea is that it's mostly going to be in Scotland, and I mean over higher ground we could see some accumulation, I guess, but
Maybe 5 centimetres on higher ground, but lower levels, of course, it's turning back to rain.
Right then, let's go back to the models then, I guess, and do the GFS.
It looks like there's a fairly decent chance of some snow showers on Monday.
Yes, it seems similar to the situation we had. Oh, when was it? No, it was end of January, right? So there was a Wednesday, I seem to remember, that had something like this.
We've had it on and off all winter. It has mainly been in the north and the west with these cold westerly, northwesterly winds. Very little this winter in the south and the southeast. I know a lot of people in the southeast have sort of been pulling their hair out, but why isn't it snowing for us down around London and places like that? And the reason is the wind direction is the westerly, northwesterly wind will feed the snow showers into the north and the west. Southeast has to get the wind into the east.
Yes, exactly. I think for parts of the southeast you really want a sort of easterly or east-northeasterly wind.
That's right. The beast from the east hasn't been unleashed this winter.
Oh, it's a shame as well. I thought it might happen at the end of February, but no.
Yeah, I was hopeful we might get something, but westerlies have dominated.
Oh, my projections for this month were disastrous, I can say. I did very well for January, I think. I basically got it right for January, but my forecast for this month was absolutely disastrous. I thought it was going to be quite cold, but no.
I thought our best chance of a cold winter was this month. A cold month this winter was February. It looks as though we're probably going to come out a little bit above average in the end, but it's going to be a very close to average winter, I think, actually. It's not going to be a big deviation, but it's certainly not a cold winter.
Yeah, exactly. It looks quite windy on Monday, actually, doesn't it? Those ice
Yeah, I think there's going to be gales again. The north and west in particular, northern England, perhaps North Wales, some quite significant winds in places could be a little bit disruptive.
So that's getting towards 100 kilometres an hour wind speeds, northwest Scotland.
Yeah, bit of a battering.
So I believe I briefly introduced these charts, but I'll introduce them again because they're quite useful. So these are the theta E charts. So the temperatures are at the 850 level, like the 850s, but they're slightly different because they don't just take temperature into account; they also take moisture, which is kind of cool because a lot of people don't realise this, but a front isn't just a boundary between warm and cold air, or cold and warm air, or cold and cool air, or whatever. It's a boundary between moist air and dry air more often than not. So these sorts of values take into account the dryness of the air as well. So basically, the blue is the cold and dry air, and the red is sort of the warm and wet air. So I like to use these maps because they define the fronts very, very clearly. What do you think about these?
They do look very useful. I don't use them regularly in my updates, but they look very useful. I might actually start using them.
What's so good about them is that, I mean, I don't use them for everything. I still use the normal 850s for a lot of things, but these are quite cool because you can see here the warm front. It's very, you can just look at this map and then instantly see where the warm front and the cold front is, and you can.
That's right. It might be more useful to use these when I do my week air forecast on a Saturday, actually, sometime.
Okay. Well, if you're interested, in the theory behind it, what these basically are is if you take all the moisture in the atmosphere at the 850 level and condense it out into a liquid, you get, I mean, just like you can get evaporation or cooling, you can get condensed. If you condense stuff, you get a heating effect. It's the other way around. So the condensation or heating sort of adds to the temperature. So you can see these temperatures are very high, like 38 degrees, because of all this heat that's being released from the moisture. So that's what they are technically. The more moist something is, the more sort of heat it releases. So anyway, incidentally, the benchmark for snow on these is about 16 degrees.
Right.
So you can see that this is Monday, I guess. So the UK is pretty much swamped with quite cold air.
Yeah, it's very useful to have seen the warmer sectors and the colder sectors of that chart. Very useful indeed.
The only thing is, of course, occluded fronts, as usual, are fairly difficult to point out. I think, like, I don't like occluded fronts because they're often difficult to spot.
That's right. It's always easier if there's occlusions involved. It's always easier to check out the UK Met Office FACS charts. They're always the best for picking out occlusions, I find.
Yeah, I think we should. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to do it later?
It's up to you. We can do it now if you would like to.
Okay. Well,
That looks quite cold for Monday, doesn't it? I think many of the showers could be wintry on Monday, even to lower levels. It just depends where those showers push through to. They won't get through to the southeast, probably.
I mean, Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, Northeast England. No, maybe Northwest England. You can see that actually some slightly milder air moves in later on Monday. Unfortunately, the sort of centre of the low pressure area moves through, which often tends to be slightly colder than the air that's to the south of it, because I think it's because the low pressure moves slowly relative to the stuff to the south of it, so it has more time to warm up. So you often get like this hole of warmer air that's sort of in the middle.
Yes, and of course we've had that a lot this winter because it's all been Atlantic driven. So as these low pressures come through, we've tended to have a lot of these warmer sectors and little pockets of warmer air coming through, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, although is it unfortunately now? I mean, I don't cold air isn't really that popular in March, is it?
Probably not. Most people are ready for a bit of spring once we get through to the end of February.
Okay. Well, again, as we can see, that when we get towards this is Wednesday, we get this warm sector pushing through on Wednesday. That's quite a vigorous cold front on the back of that.
Yeah, quite an intense gradient.
Maybe even some back edge snow. Although I mean, when was the last time you saw back edge snow? Because I think I haven't seen back edge snow in years. It must be rare. It must be quite rare.
It's been a long time. Let me think. Did we have any in 2012, 2013? I can't remember. We may have done. There was a lot of never greatly snowy until we got to the end of the winter and into the spring. But there was quite a bit of sort of marginal snow that winter, so may have been that winter. Of course, I remember 2004. Do you remember the storm, the lightning, and the back edge snow in 2004 January? I think it's around the 28th of January.
Wasn't there a white Christmas? Am I thinking of the wrong thing here? Because I thought that was a white Christmas in 2004.
Yeah, there was a white Christmas in the north, but the one I'm thinking of was in January, around the 28th or 29th of January. Excuse me, there was a really active cold front sweeping through, and it was sort of rain to start off with, then it turned to snow rapidly, and there was about an inch of snow, but it brought many places to a standstill because as soon as the snow cleared, it all froze, and the rain had washed much of the salt off the road, so it was a bit of a nightmare. But yeah, that was a classic back edge snow event, and there was lightning with that as well.
So did you say 28th of December 2004?
Right, around 28th of January.
28th of January. Okay, this.
Yeah, that's the one.
I can kind of see what you're talking about here.
There's a very active front that swept through.
So this thing here.
Yes.
Okay, I mean that you don't often see anything. You don't often see these. I mean, you don't often see the -10 line come in so quickly, do you? From relatively mild, and then suddenly the -10 line comes through.
That's right. It was very sudden drop in temperature.
No, I have no recollection of this, unfortunately.
Oh, right.
We can actually see the snow. Oh, there we go. We can see this. We can see the snow distribution there. See, there seems that there were quite a few cold fronts that came through. So the first one sort of midnight on the 28th, and then another one.
It warmed up. It warmed up a little bit, and rained, and then it turned rapidly to snow.
Okay, you can see here that it rained in Northern Ireland and then turning to snow as it moves further south. I mean, this is one interesting thing actually, that the best place for back edge snow tends to be the far south rather than the north.
I remember the rain quite well. It rained about half an hour where I am, in Northamptonshire, and then it turned to snow. And it was about an inch of snow that fell from it, and it settled. And then it more or less instantly froze. A lot of complaints about the usual thing about an inch of snow bringing the country to a standstill. But it was a very strange situation because it rained and then snowed and then froze, and it all happened so quickly. You know, that's why so many people got stuck in their cars.
Well, I can imagine it. I can imagine it being. I mean, back in 2004, perhaps it was sort of. I mean, was it anticipated to be a rain event?
I think they was forecasting snow. When the warmer sector came through during the morning and the early afternoon, I think there's quite a lot of people wondering where the snow had gone. Actually, it was the warmer sector that was a little bit unforecast. The snow, it was mainly. I think it was a long time ago. Of course, it's sort of. Well, it's 11 years ago, so maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I think it was mainly predicted to be snow.
Okay. I mean, actually, is this a warm front rather than a cold front? Because it looks to me like a cold front, but this could actually be a warm front with a little mini warm sector here.
It started off cold. There was a little bit of snow, and then I'm sure a warmer sector or something came through, and it lifted the temperature up, and it rained in the early afternoon. And then, as I say, that big drop in temperature came through, and the rain rapidly turned to snow. And the rest is history.
I think you can better see it on this chart. This little warm front here.
Yeah, just complicated the issue.
And then the warm sector sort of it bringing in some more Atlantic air. I mean, these are like these northerly wave type things are not that uncommon. I've seen them quite a lot. But even so, to actually get snow on the cold front is fairly unusual, because the air usually has to be extremely cold to get snow on a cold front. I mean, to get snow on a warm front, it doesn't really have to be that cold as even tomorrow says. But to get it on a cold front, you've got to be. I think the 850s have got to be getting on for -8 at least.
Yeah, you've got to get a very significant undercut, which is what happened with that one.
Yeah, you can definitely see something there. Well, doesn't look like it's going to happen. Well, I know the possibility of a few flakes of snow on that, but maybe nothing like that sort of thing that we've just seen.
No, that's right. Certainly no thunder, snow, and lightning.
Exactly.
That's quite exciting when you see lightning with snow. Quite unusual.
Yes, I mean thunder snow is more common when you have lake effect snow, as far as I'm aware. I mean, I saw quite a lot of thunder snow in 2010, but that was because we had very, very cold air moving over the North Sea, and of course it was late November, so the North Sea was still quite warm.
Yeah.
I don't think you can really get lake effect snow that easily at this time of year.
No, and certainly not in land where I am.
Again, this is a regime of more snow showers. I mean, for the whole week it's basically Monday a few wintry showers, and then Wednesday we get this front in. I mean, I don't know. This front never looked as good for having snow on its leading edge. I always thought that this one looks a little bit too tilted to the sort of sort of southwesterly slant.
I don't think there'll be much on that one.
No, this one looks a lot less promising than the other one. Yeah, this one's much further south. So then we get this warm sector coming through on Wednesday. So fairly mild air on that. Oh, another thing that you can use this map for, which is quite interesting, is one thing that's cool. If there are any ex-hurricanes on the way in the autumn or late summer, you can use this because hurricanes are interesting because they have a lot of warm air in their centre, and that makes them very different from depressions, which have a cold centre. So the one thing you can do is if you get this map up and then track hurricanes as they move past Newfoundland, you can see the point at which they become depressions because they lose their sort of warm cores. So that's another potential use for these maps.
Very useful. I expect it looked quite good when we brought the remains of Bertha, was it Bertha, through like in August. That was our last sort of ex-hurricane, wasn't it?
Yeah, it did. I was using these maps then, and the hurricane sort of it sort of turned into a depression at around this point based on these charts, and it was bang on right. It got it perfectly right when you compared to like the official hurricane thing. So they're very good at it. I was kind of hoping that there would still be some tropical element as it hit the UK, and arguably there was, but of course it wasn't a hurricane when it hit the UK.
That's right, they never are.
Well, arguably it happened once for Hurricane Faith. I think that's the one exception where apparently.
What year was that?
1969, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh right, okay.
Hurricane Faith hit Ireland just before it transitioned to a tropical storm. Not a tropical storm, a normal depression.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Well, I can. Oh, this one actually is not. Oh, this one's Hurricane Faith. This one went to the north of the UK rather than actually. I'm thinking of another one actually. I'm thinking of another storm that hit Ireland. I can't remember what that one's called, but this one is the most far north one, and it sort of. You can see that it became a depression sort of past the Faroe Islands. So this one could easily have hit the UK as a hurricane.
Oh right.
So the interesting thing is that when people say it's not possible for hurricanes to hit the UK, that's not strictly true. It is possible. It's just vanishingly unlikely. I think it's estimated to be a 1 in 500 year event. So once every 500 years, you would expect a hurricane to hit the UK.
Very, very rare.
But of course, with climate change, in the future they might become slightly more common. I'm not suggesting that they're going to become a regular occurrence, but if you reduce the probability from 1 in 500 to maybe 1 in 250 or something. Anyway, that's a bit of a sidetrack, but I find it quite interesting anyway.
Off on a tangent, but yeah, that's it could do. It could. These hurricanes could get more survive further north if the Atlantic becomes warmer.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, So actually, when we get to next Saturday, this looks odd. This chart looks odd because you can see that we've got really quite cold air in the southeast, but then some really mild air further northwest. So the temperature contrast from that could be pretty impressive.
That's right. I think we could get a taste of spring next weekend. Temperatures perhaps up to 13 or 14 Celsius. So that would be nice for anybody that likes warm weather.
So there we go. We can see that in the southeast, temperatures are being pegged back at, only a few degrees above freezing, but in the northwest, they're getting much higher, towards double figures.
And then that mild air should infiltrate across many parts of the country later in the weekend.
Yeah, there we go. So that's a proper southwesterly flow, that is. That's
a long fetch. That's going right down to somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic.
So that could be, if we get the phone effect, I wouldn't be surprised if we see 16 or 17 degrees in one of those few spots out of that.
It's possible with that. Hopefully there'll be some sunshine. Of course, with that sort of southwesterly fetch, there's likely to be a lot of cloud, but especially down in the south, the southeast, and to the east of high ground, we should get some sunshine, which will feel very pleasant and spring-like, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. So that, I mean, so like you say, in this sort of situation, the favoured place to be is maybe in eastern Scotland, I guess, and perhaps northeast England.
Northeast England, perhaps sort of the east of the Welsh mountains, so something like Birmingham.
Yeah, exactly.
Possibly East Anglia, southeastern England.
But it'll be pretty gruesome for the west, drizzly and fairly. I mean, it won't be warm either. It'll be much milder than it is now, but it'll still be single figures, 7 or 8 degrees, and drizzly.
Yeah, very dreary. Perhaps a bit of mist and fog as well.
I don't like this sort of weather at all. The thing was, I was talking about this, and I did get this wrong, but one thing that I was hoping for is that when you get a situation like this, with this sort of high pressure here, one thing that can happen is you get these low pressure areas that sort of nudge this thing to the southeast, and then this thing here becomes more inflated. And using this method, you tend to get high pressure areas that migrate further and further west, and can sometimes get to Greenland. And I was hoping this would happen, but unfortunately, it just seems that the conditions are not right for it. The Atlantic is just simply too strong. And we actually see a reasonably good attempt here, consider the high pressure.
Right. And I think it does get quite chilly under that high pressure that's ridging in there. That would bring, quite a drop in temperature from the long fetch southwesterly anyway.
Whoa, I did not expect to see that.
It does get quite cold with that high pressure sort of repositioning, but it doesn't last that long. I think it all rains up back to a southwesterly again. So very up and down temperatures. That's got quite cold air underneath it.
Well,
I must have been thinking of something else. I thought that gets quite interesting, doesn't it? I must have been thinking of another chart that I've looked at that did the same idea, but after the southwesterly next weekend, it repositions the high pressure. It turns quite cold, and then it ends up as a southwesterly again. Perhaps was the 6 o'clock run of the GFS. It might have been that did that, but this one sort of keeps it cold. Actually, turns it colder by the look of that, doesn't it?
I'm quite amazed at that. It is sort of the idea I was getting at, but I didn't expect it to do that. And another thing is, where's this cold air coming from? It just seems to sort of sneak in. Sort of sneaks in around that high.
Around the high from the north. So that's quite interesting.
Have you had a look at the assembles?
No, I haven't had a look at them yet, no.
Well, let's see if it's an outlier then. Okay, so 192 hours, it's the same thing. I can see a lot of purple in the north.
That's right. Southwesterly is dominating.
Yeah. Not exactly what I want to be seeing. I'm still happy for snow in March.
Really? You don't want to go to spring yet?
Well, I think it's got to be either or, really. I don't want it to be something horrible in between. So by 240, I think the polar vortex is sort of less excited here. I mean, we can see that there's some blues in Greenland instead of the oppressive purple colours.
Yeah, the heights may be coming up a little bit. I'm not sure that cool high pressure is greatly supported, though.
It doesn't look like it. Nothing at 300 either. In fact, this looks actually a little bit more zonal than it was at 240.
Doesn't necessarily mean that the operation at GFS is wrong. Just means that it's not well supported. But
yeah,
I think the operationals run at a slightly higher resolution, so it may be correct.
It's definitely an outlier, though.
It's not greatly supported.
Actually, it does have. I guess it has a little bit. This one's fairly interesting, I guess. One here as well, and one here. But generally, yeah, really nothing so much to speak of.
We may just finish up with the mid-latitude highs sitting around the country.
Yeah, I would be far less surprised if that happened. Right, do you want to have a look at another one?
Can do, yeah.
Which one? ECM?
Yeah, I'll check out the ECM. I've not seen the ECM yet. The GEM's quite stormy in the extended, but then it's often different, the GEM.
The one thing I've noticed about the GM, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the sort of cold zonal spells, it tends to underestimate how cold the air is. Have you noticed this?
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, it can do. But it can also go off on a tangent when it's mild. It wants to revert things to a colder pattern.
Yeah, that's the odd thing because the GM loves to overemphasize the sort of northeasterly type cold spells, and it doesn't like southwesterlies at all. It seems to want to gravitate towards the cold northeasterlies. But when it actually does get a cold westerly, it won't even get the -4 line to the UK. I mean, I'd be surprised if it's even doing it today, but we can have a look at that. I don't know why it does that, but it seems to hate the idea of any snow at all out of cold westerly type situations.
That's right. As I explained in the first broadcast that we did, it's better than it was, because it was a terrible model 5 or so years ago. It was down there with sort of no gaps as a joke model. It's a lot better. It's had an upgrade. It's better, but it's not as good as GFS and EWF, in my opinion.
I think it's reasonably objective. I think we will have to admit that it isn't. Okay, so that's well, we might need to have a look at the Wonderground thing for this, because the ECM's always been the most sort of supportive of Snow Tomorrow, and that's the one thing we haven't really looked at. That looks a lot better. This warm front is very well defined, and it tends to be that the more well defined the warm front is, the more likely there's going to be snow on it. A weak, pathetic warm front almost never has snow on it, but a really strong one can do. And this one looks quite strong, although there is this rubbish here, which is like a secondary front, which is really what you don't want to be seeing if you want it.
That complicates the issue quite a bit if you get those little fronts breaking up ahead.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think all they do is they just introduce a little bit of the warm air ahead of it, and you don't want that at all. You want the air down. You want basically a situation where right in front of this kink it's cold and dry, and right behind the kink it's warm and wet. And if you get that situation, you can get some pretty long-lasting and heavy snow. We might have a look at that on the Wonderground thing, because that looks more snowy than any of the other models, really, just from looking at the shape of the front.
Interesting to see how that pans out.
Exactly, but I read somewhere that the ECM is pretty bad for short term relative to, say, the GFS.
Really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think for the long term, obviously the the ECM is superior to basically all the models, but I think in the short range it doesn't do as well. And like for the New York snow event, the Boston blizzard.
Oh yeah.
The ECM got it completely wrong, and the GFS was bang on.
Oh right.
Because the GFS said that New York was going to get hit by, I think, something like 1.5 feet of snow. But the GFS wanted to sort of put the snow area a little bit further to the east, and so New York wouldn't actually be that badly affected. And
a lot of New Yorkers were wondering what all the fuss was about, weren't they?
Exactly, and the forecast that the American government issued was based on sort of a hybrid between the ECM and GFS scenario. But it turned out that they shouldn't have done that, and what they should have done is just gone with the GFS, because the ECM was completely wrong on this.
They in New York, I think they got about 4 inches, didn't they? 4 or 5 inches, and they thought that was Well, I suppose for the warnings, it was a bit of a letdown. But of course, if anywhere in the UK got 4 or 5 inches, that would be everybody would be going mad about it, wouldn't they? I thought that was quite funny.
Yeah, I mean,
If we get 4 or 5 inches of snow, then that really is doing a big snow event in this country, isn't
I
it?
mean, the Met Office would be issuing amber warnings for that, wouldn't they?
Probably going up to red even.
Really? How many centimetres is 4 or 5 inches?
4 inches would be 10 centimetres. So.
Okay, I maybe not a red because I think you have to get like 30 centimetres before.
I'm probably exaggerating a bit, but you know what I mean. If we get like 10 centimetres in this country, it's a big deal, isn't it? Whereas in America, they just couldn't understand where their snow had gone.
Well, the Met Office will issue they'll issue one of their yellow warnings for like 1 or 2 centimetres.
That's right.
In fact, it seems to me that nowadays anything more than a flurry and one of those yellow warnings gets issued.
It seems to, doesn't it? A lot of people can't understand the warning situation with UK Met, but they have a very difficult position because if they don't issue the warnings and snow occurs heavier or more widespread than they predict, then they really get it in the neck as well. So they're in a no-win situation in some cases.
I mean, I can understand that, but I think there's a cause for maybe a fourth warning that sort of sits somewhere between the yellow and the amber.
Possibly, yeah.
Because the only, I mean, like when they issue an amber warning, it's pretty serious disruption to travel. When you know things are going to get real when there's an amber warning. But for a yellow warning, the issue though is that even if there's the slightest possibility of any sort of disruption, I mean, I think there's sort of a gap that maybe could be filled by a fourth warning that sits maybe between those two.
That's right.
That's just sort of my opinion there. Anyway, see there, the cold air is on the southern side of the low pressure area, sort of coming in. If we're lucky, those showers could drive right across.
That's for Monday, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Monday is the best chance of seeing a widespread snow showers for most of the UK.
That's right. It could even, if the showers were to get far enough south, it could even get down towards the south and the southeast in the form of wintry showers. But it's just whether they can drive inland enough. That's a very strong wind, though, so they could drive a long way inland.
It's a little bit weaker for the south, though, and
right.
You can see that the wind direction is basically the worst sort of wind direction you could really hope for. It's got all this land to cover before it gets to the southeast.
That's right. I said so many people in the south and the southeast are frustrated this winter because they're not getting any snow, and it's because this pattern is so continuous with these westerly winds, northwesterly winds.
I mean, what sort of time of year would you expect that the solar convection starts to come into play? Because I noticed one thing that very surprised me is that during the March 2013 spell, when I looked at it, I thought it wouldn't really be that severe because in terms of the showers, because the lake effect required a very deep temperature layer, and despite the fact that the air was ridiculously cold, I think it was getting on for -15 at the 850 level, the sea temperatures were not supportive of that at all. They were very cold themselves. But despite that, there was actually thundersnow in March 2013, but I think that was due to actually a convectional heating effect that started to come into play.
Possibly, it can happen in March. It certainly happens in April, I think, at times.
I mean, this was late March, so I guess it's possible. I mean, is there really any effect of it at this time of year, though? I mean, I can start to feel the warmth of the sun now, so...
I think it's probably a bit early.
Okay. So maybe another month before the sort of solar-based convection.
Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay. So same sort of idea as the GFS then, basically, with this one. And then that warm sector on the Wednesday, much weaker warm front, so no snow on that. Again, Thursday, cold air comes back, so some snow on the back edge of this.
Possibly, and then snow showers again for the north.
Thursday, so weekend we've got this very mild air coming up.
Southwesterly. prevailing.
I mean, you were talking about this sort of pattern in one of your vids recently, of the cold, these cold sectors being much colder than you would usually expect them to be.
Yes, this week they could be. The air is so cold in the North Atlantic, but it's getting late now as well. It's getting late with the time of the year, really. But I think they will be a bit colder than they would tend to be. I think if you averaged out the temperature for the week, it probably comes out a little bit colder than average.
That must be fairly unusual for this sort of pattern.
Had quite a bit of it this winter, I think. It's been a strange winter because the Arctic Oscillation and the North Atlantic Oscillation have been so positive generally, but the temperature is going to be coming out very close to average. So another year it could have been a really mild winter actually. Been lucky, probably done well to get it as cold as we have done. And to get as much snow as we have done. Admittedly, in the southeast, there's not been a great deal, but for the north, it's been quite a decent winter. It just goes to show you that even when the westerlies are predominating, and the North Atlantic Oscillation, Arctic Oscillation is very positive, you can sometimes get quite a bit of snow, and they have done in the north. Been very lucky. Or unlucky, depending on their viewpoint.
Well, for me, it's been pretty bad. I have to admit. Nowhere near as bad as last year, but there was only really one day which you could call a proper snowy day. I've seen maybe a week's worth of days where there was some snow in it, but the snow was pretty. It only settled on one of those days.
It's not been very good where I am.
No. Plenty
Plenty of frost. Been quite a bit of frost.
I haven't seen much of that either. I've only seen.
Really, it's been quite where I am. It's been quite a lot of frost, and at least it's felt like more of a winter. If you see what I mean, it's felt like a winter generally, although not a cold winter. But at least it's felt like December, January, February. There's been quite a bit of frost. So
I didn't get that impression. I think it must be because you're further south and sort of the
I'm inland. I'm landlocked, so it allows the temperature to fall at night when it's still. And I'm in the sticks as well. I'm in the countryside, so.
So yeah.
Rural localities always do better for frost.
I went to Iceland. I've been to Iceland in the winter several times. I mean, this is relevant because when I was in Iceland, there was a westerly wind, and it's interesting because the sort of air mass that was present while I was in Iceland is very similar to what we've had this winter in the UK, albeit far more moderated. Because in Iceland you have, whenever it's westerly, which is not that, it's usually easterly in Iceland, but when the wind is westerly in Iceland, it tends to be very cold. It tends to be sort of like several degrees colder than the UK, and it tends to have a lot of snow showers on it. Whereas when the wind is to the east, it tends to be very mild in Iceland. It seems it's the opposite of the UK.
I suppose it's because a westerly feeds the air straight in from Greenland.
But I mean, the point is that it felt like an Icelandic winter this year, with it being with there being quite a lot of cold periods, but nothing really very cold.
No.
And that's basically Iceland in a word. But I bring this up because when I was in Iceland, the air felt very similar there to what it felt here this winter during the cold spells. You can kind of tell from the sort of humidity and how cold it feels. It felt very similar. Man, -8 from a westerly or southwesterly. That's got to be unusual.
Yes, it is distinctly cold, isn't it? That January 1984 is the year that stands out for me as being very cold with westerly winds. That was unusual. It was an unusual severity of cold. I'm not sure what really happened that month, January 1984. I'm quite young, so it doesn't. I'm not sure what happened, but it was an unusual depth of cold that came across the Atlantic.
It was. I mean, it almost looks like sort of a US type winter with these bubbles of cold coming in from the northwest. Of course, we're next to an ocean, so rather than a continent. So
it was modified. They didn't even on that situation in that month. There wasn't a great deal in the far south and southeast of snow.
Well, this looks a very interesting event. This has got some continental influence here. So I think 1984 is cheating a little bit because it wasn't completely westerly. I think there were a couple of days here that look rather continental.
Yeah.
So I think that would have pulled.
I don't remember it greatly. I was been about 6 years old, so I can't remember it greatly. But I know the north did very, very well that month of snow, and there was some in the south.
Yeah, when the CET came out. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was some snow in the south, but not as much as in the north.
I mean, the CET came out exactly average. So it shows that even the coldest zonal months just can't compete with something that is not zonal.
That's right.
Just looks like a far more extreme version of this year.
For the south and the east, the wind has to be in from the east to get a proper sustained blast of winter.
So what's your
from the north? In 2010, it was a lot of it was from the north, but that was in a very unusual pattern with so much blocking over Greenland.
Yeah, I mean, 2010 had sort of like a mixture of Scandinavian highs and.
Yes, it was one of those very extreme months where it was to the east and to the north.
It's I still can't get over that winter. It was my car thermometer, well, not my car at that point, cause actually that was the year that I passed my driving test. So anyway, getting off the point there, but the car thermometer was minus 20 on one morning. It was low, but minus 20.
I know it was very extremely cold.
I think. But I've never seen minus 20 before in the UK, and that was the first and last time I ever saw minus 20.
Where I am, I think the minimum was around minus 13, so you did better than me for frost that winter.
It was only on one morning though. That particular day where we saw where it was minus 20 at about 7 o'clock in the morning, it failed to get. It was minus 11 at midday. It was an insanely cold day. I don't think I think that's a once in a lifetime event. I don't think I'm ever going to see that again.
Possibly. Although, of course, December 1981 isn't all that long ago. To get another one in 2010. So
there was some minus 20 something.
Never say never.
Sorry, go ahead.
You can never say never.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, 1947 and 1963. Some people lived through both, I guess.
That's right.
So you're saying the GEM was pretty stormy?
Yeah, it in its extended range, it looks quite vigorous.
I see some paler blues in the north. Is this going to go?
That's another one coming through around the second, third, quite a deep low pressure system. So that doesn't really. Do we get the long fetch southwesterly with that one over the weekend? Not as much, I don't think.
No, not really. Well, briefly. Doesn't.
Little bit, but it's not as much as on the GFS and the ECM.
There could even be snow on that, actually. Because depending on how cold that is, I mean, there's been cold air that's sort of there for a while, and warm front there. I don't think there will be. It just looks too weak, despite the sort of prominent pink.
It does look a weak feature.
Exactly. Shall we test my theory that the minus 4 line will not hit the UK on this? Right. Obviously, it will start. It will start off as cold because even the GEM can't deny the present. But see what I mean?
Yeah, it
Just
doesn't.
manages it,
It
but
doesn't do it with much conviction, does it?
and bearing in mind the GFS had -6s and -8. See, it barely manages the -4 line. Just about. I'm sure. This. I haven't seen this, by the way. It wasn't something I hadn't seen the GEM before this. I'm sure. This isn't a fluke. There has to be something in this because every time I play the GEM, and it's one of these situations. The air mass temperature is about 2 or 3 degrees warmer than the other models show. And when it's this westerly pattern, it's the other way around when it's a cold pattern.
I will keep an eye out for that. I hadn't noticed it. I've noticed that sometimes it goes over the top, trying to get wind into the east, but I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't take these 850 temperatures at all seriously when they're based on the GEM. The just my other observations on the other model intricacies. The NAV gem when it's a really cold spell, the NAV gem tends to overdo how cold the 850 is going to be. The GEM overdoes them when it's a cold situation. So the GEM makes them colder when it is cold, but makes them warmer when it's the GFSs and the ECM don't really. I haven't noticed anything massive on those. The GME, the German one, massively overdoes them. So the GME has the -15 line over the UK when the -10 line should be there. The GME is notorious for this. Oh, you noticed that one?
Which one was that? Sorry.
The GME. Oh, I think it's.
Oh right, yeah. No, I hadn't noticed that. I don't use that one a great deal, funnily enough.
It's short-term German one,
Yeah,
but this
I
one
know.
massively overdoes how cold it is.
I very rarely check that one out.
I'll see if I can prove my point. I haven't seen this. Let's see if it'll prove me right. No, it's not playing ball. Maybe it doesn't work for westerlies, just like the GEM doesn't.
It's more of an easterly phenomenon.
Exactly. Yeah. That's all the moles done. Shall we see if there are any questions then? I noticed the popularity's been less this week, presumably because it's end of February and people aren't interested anymore.
Everything gets quieter in February and March and April.
Oh no, there aren't any questions at all. So
I shall go to GavsWeatherVids and see whether there's anything doing there.
Yeah.
It's always quieter in March, February, March, April. They're always quietest months, but at least it gives me the chance to have a sleep. I get the chance to wind things down a bit, and then it all starts getting a bit busier as we go through into May. So I think I had a question earlier on from Harry. Harry wanted to know about why it's. I've answered this already. I think why it's mainly the north, Scotland, Northern England, that's getting the snow, not the south, southeast. The reason is the wind direction and the pattern, the westerly, is bringing the snow showers into the north and west. Doesn't get down to the south and the southeast. Get snow in the south, southeast. Got to get the winds in from the east. Oliver has asked a question about solar activity and colder winters. I think that I don't know about what you think on this, Quantum, but there is, I think, a connection between solar minimum and colder winters. So when you're around solar minimum and coming out of solar minimum 2 or 3 years afterwards, it increases your chance around that time of getting colder winters for the UK. It's probably because the jet stream becomes weaker due to changes in solar flux. But anyway, yeah, I think there's that connection that when you come out of the solar minimum for 2 or 3 years afterwards, you've got a greater chance of getting a cold winter. But in the UK, there's never a guarantee at any point that you'll get a colder winter because all the things are stacked against us really to get blocking sustained. So, but there is that connection. And then Stephen Smith has asked. Stephen Smith says, "Hi guys, what are your views on the idea doing around that our milder winters are being caused by what goes on in the weather in Southeast Asia and Malaysia?" That isn't one that I'd heard of, actually. Have you heard of that, Quantum?
These, I've heard that there were, well, from the Weather Outlook, I mean, Storm Chase tends to write about these a lot. All these sort of indices. I think that one's called the Madden-Julian oscillation, that sort of thing.
Ah, right, yeah.
I honestly know very little about them. To be honest, I find it very difficult to get interested by them.
I think a lot of those indexes are just another way of describing the pattern, if you like. So it's hard to explain the point I want to get across with that, but some people can get, it's same with the QBO, the quasi-biennial oscillation. Some people can get quite fixated about the QBO, and if it's easterly, then it guarantees our chance of a cold winter, apparently, but it doesn't. And if the quasi-biennial oscillation is westerly, then it sort of writes off the chance of a cold winter, which again, it doesn't. So I think a lot of these indexes are just a way of describing what the pattern is already doing, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is I don't know much about these tropical indexes, but I know about the AO and the NAO, and I think one mistake that people tend to make is that they think that the NAO and the AO is some sort of driver. It drives things.
It's just an index that tells you what the atmosphere is doing at that particular point.
Yeah.
So when you're forecasting, say, the NAO or the MJO, when you're issuing a forecast, all you're doing really is looking at what the models are showing, and then the index will be reflecting what the models are showing. So if the models are wrong, then your forecast for the, let's say the NAO, if you're forecasting it to go negative in day 10, if the models are wrong with their forecast of blocking, then your NAO forecast is going to be wrong, if you see what I mean, because all the NAO is telling you is what the models are doing at that time. Or if it's today, then it's just telling you what the situation is today.
Yes. Yeah, I can completely agree with that. I mean, I would say though that just to emphasise that this doesn't mean that the AO and the NAO are useless. They are quite useful, because you can, if you didn't use the NAO and the AO, you would have to look through an entire ensemble suite and have to sort of try and pick out patterns from that. Whereas what the NAO and the AO do is they look at all of them, average them out, and then come up with a single number that is a representative that represents all of these things combined. So
that's right.
It's convenience more than anything else. So in theory, if you're a very, if you're a professional forecaster, you could come up with a far better picture of what's going on by looking at the ensemble members individually and looking at the individual patterns. But if you were to do that, it would take you much longer. Whereas with this, I can just look. Oh, okay. All these red lines represent ensemble members. Most of them are positive. That means that most of the GFS charts at say 384 are going to be low pressure in the sort of Arctic basin, high pressure probably in the Azores, and as we've already looked at these earlier, it's pretty well confirmed that that's what is going to happen. It just saves time. But
there's always got to be the caveat that these are just telling you what the pattern is. They're not a driver. And a lot of people do talk about the NAO and the AO as though they were drivers of a pattern, which they're not.
But I mean, of course, you can use them, and another useful thing you can do is that with looking at the entire picture, it's very difficult to come up with, like, if you want to compare solar activity and how cold a winter was. I mean, you could use something like CET, but you might want to use this as well, because this actually looks at the blocking. I just think it should be emphasised, like you've just said, that this is convenience and practicality at work here. It isn't. There's no special secret science going on. It's just practical. You just input.
Out of interest, that's a very positive Arctic oscillation, isn't it? Around the end of February, that's going very, very positive.
Yeah, I mean, I watched your video. I mean, you were saying this sort of thing.
I'm not sure if that would be a record-breaking positive. I don't know, but it's very.
I don't think it will be record-breaking, because these numbers actually represent standard deviations. I looked this up because a lot of the usual suspects were saying some very wrong things about these oscillations. So I wanted to really understand it so I can debunk what they were saying. These represent standard deviations. Now, I think they're normalized, but I'm not exactly sure how they're normalized, whether they're normalized by month or whether they're normalized by day. I suspect, given that these numbers are fairly low, that they're normalized by month, because if they were normalized by day, they'd be all over the place like this. So, given that, the sort of highest on record, the sort of highest Arctic oscillation on record would be 3 standard deviations is something like 0.01%, and there haven't been that many years in the record. So if you get a month that is maybe at 3 for that sort of averages 3 for the entire month, I reckon that would be record breaking. That's the sort of thing you would expect for it to be record breaking. It's just a guess, but I think 3, certainly 4. You would not get anything above 4 for an entire month. You will not see an average above 4, and you can see this one's 0.3, which is 0.3 is nothing really. It's only slightly above normal.
Right.
That's assuming that I'm right, of course. I might be wrong about this. This might well be normalised by day. I don't know.
Perhaps somebody will be able to tell us.
Yeah, this is something that you often get comments in retrospect with people that know this sort of thing, but I don't know. So the other one is the NAO, of course. Now, when I watched your video, I noticed something fairly interesting, and I think you mentioned this, that the NAO wasn't quite as positive as the AO. In fact, this one seems to have a negative trend on it.
That's right. It is going downwards very gradually, isn't it? Once it goes through to March, anyway.
What's your opinion on this? Do you think the NAO is sort of more important than the AO in terms of cold weather for the UK?
Probably, because if the AO is negative, that could be sending the cold air down into Canada and America or into Asia. I think the NAO is probably a little bit more important, but they're both sort of they're both important in their own ways. If you can get them both showing negative at the same time, then you're in business normally.
I mean, we've seen several times this year because you can look at this, and the NAO has only gone negative once in the entire winter. But there were several occasions when the AO went slightly negative. But I've never, well, I might have done, but getting a situation where the NAO goes negative and the AO is positive, that is pretty unusual, isn't it?
AO positive, NAO negative. Yeah, that is unusual. I've never seen that, I don't think. I suppose it does happen, but I don't know. But excuse me, I think the NAO is probably a little bit more important for us than the AO.
Okay. But at this stage, probably you want to be seeing a positive if you're looking for mild weather, I guess.
Probably. if you want to get on with spring, yeah, you want to get the southwesterlies in.
Anyway,
often it does turn around, but as you go through, after a mild winter, so often it does turn around in the spring. You get a fairly significant cold spell in March or April. of course, as we know, it's more likely that you'll have a white Easter than a white Christmas. So it's just unfortunate that where we are, we tend to get the milder weather in the winter, and then we tend to get a flip to something colder at some point through the spring.
Yes, exactly. And of course, in 2005 we had that. I was hoping for it to happen again this year, but it doesn't seem to.
Yeah, 2005 was quite a delayed spring, wasn't it?
I'm on your links page anyway. I suppose we'll be finishing soon, but is there any long-range thing you want to have a brief look at? Because you usually.
Shall we? Well, I don't want to say too much about tomorrow's video.
Oh, okay, because you're releasing your forecast.
Have a look at the CFS week 1 to 4 anomalies. Have a quick look at those with 500 millibar heights over the next month.
Okay, so this one, I guess.
Yeah.
I haven't used these before.
Right. You can't flip them around. So week 1, we've got the trough in across the country there with the blue colours. So as we know, 20th, 27th is going to be quite an unsettled period. Week 2, 20th, 28th to the 6th of March, we're ridging the high pressure a little bit to the south, lifting the trough out a bit to the north. So that's settling down, it's getting a bit better. And that backs up the idea that we may get some milder weather to start March. These do change day by day, though.
So this is the week 3 and week 4.
Yeah, week 3 we're at the 7th to the 13th of March, and we're ridging the high pressure. It's going up towards Scandinavia.
What does that mean at this time of year? It's always a difficult one when it happens in mid-March.
It depends whether there's an area of cold on the continent, probably, but that would probably be cooler than the second week. But I think the third week there is cooler with the high pressure going there. That would be shifting the winds into the east a little bit. And then if we see to week 4, the 14th to 20th of March, that's maintained, really. The high pressure is maintained over Scandinavia. So again, a lot of dry weather coming up in March, if this is right. It'll be quite a dry month, but not necessarily all that warm. It could be chilly at times on that.
You can get warm easterlies at this time of year.
Can do, but it would probably be quite gloomy.
Yeah.
Drizzly, not very pleasant.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Even in January, the folks cold easterlies are horrible. Just days and days of drizzle, and if you're lucky, a little bit of sleet in there as well.
I think that is looking like quite a dry March. But the temperature, it's difficult to say what temperature is. You actually have to look and see what the temperature anomaly is. If you go through to...
is this it?
Yeah, that's the one, SFCT. You can see what the temperature anomalies are showing. And it looks like they're sort of close to normal, maybe a little bit cooler than normal, actually, for week 3. Job to see. But certainly not all that mild, anyway. It's not suggesting anything particularly warm.
Some warm air in the east of the US. That's something you haven't seen.
That's right. There's a change. Could be some changes coming up for America in March. They'll be thankful for it, I think. Of course, the west of America's had quite a mild winter.
The north and the west hasn't it?
Yeah, the ridge has been in the northwest with the trough in the east. So it's been like the nation's been divided east to west, with the east very cold and the west quite warm. It was expected that would be the pattern this winter, so that's come off quite nicely.
I really hope it doesn't happen again next year, because we've had 2 years worth of this dreary pattern now, and it's just, I hope we get something better next year.
I think for America the pattern will be different, but whether that necessarily means that we're in business, I don't know, because there will still be there will still be things going against us, I think, next year to get a cold winter, but it may be colder And I think the pattern will be significantly different for America. I don't think the east of America will be hammered like they have been this winter, and certainly some northern parts of America had a cold winter last winter, of course, as well. So I think they'll get off a bit better next winter. But whether that necessarily means we're in business, I don't know yet.
Have you a slightly controversial question actually? Because I mean, there was a lot of anticipation about this winter, and with the October pattern index being
yes.
What do you think about that now? I mean, I was quite a skeptic when the October pattern index came out.
I think there's merit in. I think what the October pattern index is trying to do is very difficult to actually work out what it's trying to do. I think what it's trying to do is give you an idea of how quickly the snow cover is building up over Russia through October via, in terms of the October pattern index, it's to do with blocking, I think, over the pole, and it's trying to tell you how much blocking you've had over the pole. But it feeds back to the idea that there's a very rapid build-up of snow cover across Siberia, which of course we had in October, and in some instances a very rapid build-up of snow over Siberia is important. It's one of the things I look at for a winter forecast, but it's not the only thing that you can look at. There are, for us, the Atlantic is very, very important, and this winter the Atlantic set up the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic. They never look conducive. They never look conducive to giving us a cold winter, and solar activity coming off that solar maximum that happened last winter is also going against us this year, although of course the solar cycle is much lower than it has been through most of the 20th century. So it's a weaker, very weak solar cycle. Nevertheless, we're still coming out of the solar maximum, and that negates the chance of us getting a cold winter as well. If we could have got that rapid build-up of snow cover that we had in October last year, and I think the OPI index is tying into that idea, but it's, as I say, it's very difficult to work out exactly what the OPI is and what they're trying to do with it, but I think it's tying in to the idea of a rapid build-up of snow cover across Russia. If we could have got that around a solar minimum, and with an Atlantic pattern that was conducive to a negative North Atlantic oscillation type pattern, so conducive to a pattern where you've got blocking around Iceland, low pressure around the Azores. If we could have got the three together, then we could have been in business, but on its own it wasn't enough.
I mean, the thing that I seemed to observe was that both 2014 and this year were very weak in terms of hurricane seasons.
That's something else that I look at as well, and that comes from Joe Bastardi. I don't know whether you're familiar with Joe Bastardi's controversial forecasting in America. He does a lot of stuff on climate.
I'm familiar with his opinions on climate change.
I tend to stay away from that side of things, but in terms of the long-range forecasting, he's quite good, and that's one of the things that I think Joe has tended to look at, hurricane activity. And when you've got a lot of hurricanes, they tend to later on feed back to an increased chance of blocking. We have had 2 quiet hurricane seasons, so that's probably another factor that's gone against us for this winter and for last winter.
So that might be one thing to look out for.
Yeah, you can get a lot of hurricanes. They're transporting heat from the tropics into the mid-latitudes and eventually up in towards the pole, sort of via Earth, one of the Earth's thermostats anyway. And when you've got a lot of heat being dumped via hurricanes into the pole, then later on that can feed back. But it's a good thing, really, that we haven't had a great deal of heat being dumped into the pole via hurricanes, of course, because it's allowed, or helped a little bit, probably, the ice to just recover slightly compared to was it 2012 where we had that
2012, yeah.
Yeah, dropping.
The Arctic ice is well, we can have a look at that now very briefly. I don't want to spend too long on this, but the Arctic ice is something that really surprised me because I didn't think such a recovery was really possible from 2012.
It was a very bad year, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but the thing was that I don't think we can really say that this year was particularly special. But 2000.
No, it's certainly not doing anything amazing. It's just, I think it's just probably holding off a little bit longer, you know.
But no, I mean, despite this year not being very interesting, 2013 I think was. 2013 amazed me because it was basically. I mean, I've looked at this in all the years since the satellite record began, and since I think 1979 was when the satellite record began. The single best year for Arctic ice retention was 1996. That was just low pressure basically all summer. It was ridiculous. I mean, it was the highest sea ice minimum on record, despite being part of the downward trend. Of course, this was 1996. It was the highest on record, despite the long-term downward trend, because of this low pressure area. Now, in 2013, what we had was a pattern similar to 1996, except that in 1996, the low pressure areas were so strong that with the weak state of the ice in 2012, and 1996 would actually have been bad for us. But what we had in 2013 was this amazingly sort of sweet spot scenario where we had basically the smaller, weaker cousin in 1996, but it was basically the same other than the storms were not quite as strong. So I think 2013 was literally the best possible summer we could have hoped for sea ice retention. And last year was good as well. Don't get me wrong, last year was very good as well. But 2013 was insanely good. I mean, it
certainly went in our favour.
Yeah, exactly. It was like if I could have designed the perfect pattern to save the Arctic sea ice, I would have designed 2013. Apart from the last week of July, which was a little bit iffy, but apart from that, 2013 was the perfect storm, if you like. So
yeah.
It saved us for then. But yeah, the ice is interesting because I'm not sure if this is having much of an impact, but the odd thing about it is that the ice has actually been not above average, but it's been close to average in the Atlantic sector and below average in the Pacific sector, which is the opposite to what we've had in the last 5 or so years. Because for the last 5 or so years, it's been the other way around. The Pacific sector's actually had quite a lot of ice and less ice in the Atlantic sector.
The Pacific is a little bit warmer at the moment around Alaska and the Pacific coast of America and Canada. The Atlantic's a little bit cooler, so that's probably having an effect on what's going on with the ice.
But I think this comes back to what we expected this winter, because with the Atlantic ice much healthier than usual, well, not usual, but over the last 5 years, the colder air is sort of a little bit closer, so it sort of enhances the vortex here. Whereas on the other side, with the Pacific, the ice is receded. So the opposite thing happens, and we've got blocking promoted here.
Bridging, yeah.
And blocking over Alaska, of course, what that does is that sends the cold air towards the US, and then that pumps it.
Right.
So I don't know. That's just an intuition, but I think it's.
I think there is definitely a connection going on there between the Pacific and the Atlantic, and the ice on both the Pacific side and the Atlantic side of the Arctic. There's definitely a connection between the bigger pattern that's happening in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess you'll have more to say about that tomorrow.
Well, it's spring tomorrow. We're looking at the spring final spring forecast, and then on the blog tomorrow evening I'm going to have a little bit of a sneak peek at the summer. Just finally, a couple of comments from James and Stephen Smith. James Acrill says that the highest mean monthly Arctic oscillation figure was 3.5 for January 1993. I remember that. That was a very stormy January. And Stephen Smith wants to know if it seems there is a connection to the pollution and smogs, etc., caused by industrialisation and growth in that population area. That's relating back to the points about Malaysia and Southeast Asia. But 1993 from James, January 1993, most positive Arctic oscillation.
What was it again? I didn't quite catch it.
It was the monthly Arctic oscillation number for mean monthly Arctic oscillation number was 3.5.
Oh, I was close. I was close.
January 1993.
My guess wasn't bad. I guessed about 3, a little bit higher than what I guessed. Oh. So it probably is standardised by month then. Oh, I'm quite pleased with that. I got something right for once.
Yeah, you was very close, very good guess. But I can't remember all about January 1993. I think it's very many of those winters in the late 80s and the early 90s were a write-off cold weather. So except for 1991, which was good, but the rest had a long run from sort of 1988 to 1995 were very mild Atlantic-driven winters. So that's one of those. They all sort of blend into one from that period, from 88 through to around 95. They all sort of blend into one. So I can't remember a great deal about January 1993, but it must have been a very westerly month.
Sorry, my mic went off. Did you want to start to finish up now then?
Yeah, we better close things up.
I'll leave everyone with Monday's snow risk map. It's not that impressive, unfortunately, but same pattern. If you're in the north and the west, you're more likely to see the snow on Monday. I think this is a little bit late, where the sort of warmer air is starting to move in from the west, but Monday looks good for general snow showers. Okay, so hope everyone enjoyed. Do you want to have the last word, Gav?
Yeah, okay. Thanks very much for inviting me to the second broadcast that we've done, Quantum. It's been great fun. And thanks to everybody for tuning in, and hope you've enjoyed it and found it informative. That's it from me.
Okay, we'll go off now. Bye, everyone.